They include Baptists, Evangelical Christians, Pentecostals, as well as other Protestants. Many factors have contributed to this concentration of Protestant believers in Ukraine, but surely the emergence of tolerance, religious diversity, and religious pluralism as governing principles are key among them. This has created a vibrant religious marketplace in which a plethora of religious groups compete for members, and in which religious symbolism and practice are broadly accepted in public institutions and in public space. When Ukrainian territories fell under Russian occupation in 2014, the persecution of minority religious communities followed. Evangelicals were especially targeted. And I'll discuss why evangelicals incur the wrath of Russian ruling authorities, and specifically what the consequences have been. The repression of evangelicals in the occupied territories of Ukraine has been so fierce because the established religious pluralism that allowed Protestant communities to thrive in Ukraine clashes with the imposition of the Russian world ideology that comes with Russian rule. The Russian world posits that Eastern Slavs are part of a single spiritual and historical civilizational space that includes Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and sometimes even Moldova and Kazakhstan. And increasingly, it really brings in anyone who recognizes the importance of traditional values and the Russian Orthodox Church as their protector. But the key point is that there is no place for Protestants in the Russian world. They are apostates to their faith and traitors to their nation precisely because they have abandoned orthodoxy. The Russian world ideology justifies the repression of religious minorities and privileges Russian orthodoxy as a state-protected guardian of these traditional values of public morality and social and political order. The second reason evangelicals have been targeted is that Baptists and evangelical Christians have long been demonized because of their negative association, because of the negative associations that Protestantism carries with the United States. Clergy and active believers are subject to charges of being foreign agents or American spies. The 2012 foreign agent law has been repeatedly used in Russia and now in the occupied territories to crack down on civil society organizations, to silence dissent, and jail even potential members of an opposition. This law is used to restrict religious freedom, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. It targets religious leaders, members of NGOs, human rights activists, and independent journalists, among others, by mandating complicated and often contradictory reporting and registration requirements. Non-compliance results in fines, jails, or closure of the organization. As a result, occupation by Russian forces slips easily and quickly into religious repression, especially of evangelicals, because the Russian state implements entirely different policies toward non-Russian Orthodox Church affiliated religious communities than the Ukrainian state does. The repressive treatment evangelicals received in the USSR and to a degree continue to experience in Russia is even more brutal and violent in the Russian-controlled occupied territories of Ukraine. So let's consider the consequences. Viewed as apostates to their native Orthodox faith, traitors to their nation, and foreign agents who undermine anti-Western Orthodox conservatism, evangelicals have been subject to searches, abductions, interrogations, unlawful detainment, and torture. They've had their property confiscated, their families threatened, and been subject to physical violence. Pastors are pressured to re-affiliate to religious organizations in Russia. And since 2022, over 40 clergy have faced reprisals and 5 have been killed. Residents of 8 Ukrainian regions under occupation report religious persecution and other violations of religious freedom. In Zaporizhia, there are at least 47 cases, Kherson, 20, Lugansk, 13, Donetsk, 11, and the list goes on. Russian Federal Law 114, also known as the Yarovaya Law, passed in 2016, is so broad so as to leave evangelicals vulnerable to charges of extremism or illegal missionary activities. As a result, many evangelicals were forced to flee the occupied territories. By December 2023, not even 2 years into the war, over 630 churches and religious buildings had been destroyed or damaged. 1/3, or at least 206, were Protestant. In occupied Donetsk, there were at least 146 documented cases of damaged or destroyed religious buildings. In Lugansk, at least 83, Kherson, 78, and in Zaporizhia, at least 51. Other religious buildings were looted and converted to arsenals, police headquarters, and United Russia offices. Only a few Protestant churches are open in the occupied Donetsk region. There are parts of Lugansk and Zaporizhia regions where not a single Protestant church remains opened. And we'll hear more about Melitopol, a city in southern Ukraine that at one point had more Protestant prayer houses than Orthodox churches prior to 2022, and today not a single Protestant church remains. There's little to suggest that such repressive measures against evangelicals will cease. In fact, the reverse is likely. As harsh as restrictions are on evangelical communities in Russia proper, they are far worse in occupied Ukraine. Whereas previously most evangelicals espoused an Anabaptist pacifism and performed alternative military service, now having declared this a just war, many evangelicals serve in the Ukrainian armed forces. Previous networks of cooperation and association of all kinds, missionary, humanitarian, and educational, that united Russian and Ukrainian evangelicals in common endeavor have been shattered as a result of this war. And this is true for nearly all religious associations and networks, regardless of confession, that linked Russian and Ukrainian co-believers. In sum, the occupation of Ukrainian territories has ushered in religious repression of evangelicals because the Russian state has distinct policies for non-Russian Orthodox Church religious communities. This is a long-standing practice and is unlikely to change under the current Russian leadership. And the goal for a democratizing Ukraine and for its allies is to ensure that religious freedom, tolerance, and pluralism are not additional casualties of this war. Russia and its president, Vladimir Putin, must be held accountable for their numerous war crimes in Ukraine so that they will be deterred from further attempts to use religion to inspire violence and to justify repression of religious minorities as they are doing in the occupied territories of Ukraine. Thank you.